All right, good. So now I think it's time for the big treat for tonight. So may I present Nevin Liber, who is actually here from the US to give a talk. Now, of course, you may think, how does a US guy end up in Munich to give a talk? Well, I already mentioned it. Last week, there was a standardization committee meeting in Hagenberg in Austria. And this is, well, definitely an opportunity for us to ask people, can you give a talk here in Munich? It's not far away. And so this is exactly what happened. We asked Nevin if he wants to do a talk, and we're super, super happy to have him. So just a very few rough information about Nevin. So he's working at the Argonne National Lab, which you may know as one of the big computing centers in the US. So there he is working on Crocus, so just a system to do some performance portability. You work on SYCL, also probably as a chair somewhere. SYCL is kind of an abstraction layer for heterogeneous device computing. And you are one of the people who have the honor to work on the Aurora system, one of the first exascale systems. So you're not talking about 50 years of doing C+ standardization. We're very much excited to learn about that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'm Nevin Liber. I am recovering from the standards meeting we had last week. It was very intense, very stressful, but we got a lot of really good stuff done. So I'm going to do the 2-minute what the national labs, Argonne, and my division in Argonne do. So the National Laboratory System in the U.S. is composed of 17 different laboratories. There's 2 in Illinois, one at Fermilab, and one is Argonne. Started in 1946 for nuclear power. They decided doing nuclear experiments underneath the football field at the University of Chicago by a major city is probably a bad idea. So let's go 30 miles west. We got a nice budget. We got lots of employees, almost 4,000 employees, lots of users, lots of students. And we're just, doing lots of cool, that's not the button. Lots of cool stuff, right? And the one that we're going to be using our supercomputer for is AI for science. We're actually training an AI model on our new supercomputer Aurora with high quality data, publicly available data, so we can have it help with science experiments. We found out during COVID-19, people were using large language models to help find vaccines. So the part I work for is the little Argonne Leadership Computing Facility. Right? I work on a supercomputer, and my rough definition of supercomputer is the computer costs more money than people do. And it's, I don't know, it's second fastest in the world, third, I don't know, magazines rate these things. I don't really pay much attention. So I work at the Argonne Leadership Computing Facility, and we do cool research, right? Simulation, data learning, there's material science, a lot of battery research in Argonne, and we do the computing to support all that. So who am I, right? It's pretty scary that I'm in the actual standard decks for Argonne. But I happen to be in the right place at the right time for the picture. So I'm on W21 being the standard C++ committee. By the way, if you have questions, feel free to interrupt me. And if I'm speaking too fast, because I do that when I'm nervous, also feel free to interrupt me. So I'm a computer scientist in ALCF, and I work on 3 things. C++, I'm the C++ expert at Argonne. SYCL, which is, you saw OpenGL and a few other things on the last presentation. That's all standardized by the Kronos group. They have a SYCL committee there as well. So I'm Argonne's representative, one of Argonne's representatives on that committee. And as part of that, because I do C++, I'm the C++ compatibility subgroup chair. Now, for Argonne, this all fits into our mission, right? We're trying to do cool research, cool science, make the world better. And then I got a bunch of chairships while doing standardization. I became the U.S. National Body Vice Chair. The way I became this is my former manager got promoted. went off to the Department of Energy directly and said, hey, Nevin, I don't have time for this. Do you want to do it? That's how you get chairmanships. A lot of it is just you got to be willing to do the work. And it also, one thing it helps with, if you want to go to standards meetings, it helps sell it inside your organization, saying, I'm a chair, I need to be there. Most of the admin chair, so like the mailings that come out, those are my responsibility, taking attendance, that kind of stuff's my responsibility to make sure it happens. And overall, the manager of the infrastructure. I mean, our infrastructure is old, we're trying to make it better, but I'm like the point person. I'm also the Library Evolution Working Group Incubator co-chair. This started in San Diego is when they started the library incubators. We were getting way too many papers at the time. We still are. And so we formed little groups to like start, get the first papers going, like when they first start, so that the bigger groups are more efficient. And as part of that, as part of the pandemic, and since then, a bunch of us became Library Evolution Working Group vice chairs. Andreas is also now a vice chair. Because we're trying to, yes? We have no real official titles. We just kind of make them up. I mean, Billy Baker's probably does more work than me for Loogie, so I could just say vice chair to him. But we just speak for those rooms. Although nobody speaks for the committee. Oh, good question. Yeah, no one speaks for the committee. I don't speak for the committee. Even Herb Sutter, our convener, doesn't speak for the committee. Like polls we take, that speaks for the committee. Everything else is really our individual expert opinions. So I've been doing C++ for a long time, 1 hour a day for most of my life. And I'm still learning, right? It's weird because I'm on the committee, which means every 3 years I vote to lower my percentage knowledge of the language down. I do have humble beginnings. Most people do. I'm going to do lots of name dropping in this. I didn't know they'd be famous. Some of them would be famous at the time. So my first job out of college is working at AT&T at Bell Laboratories in Indian Hill, the Indian Hill part of Illinois, and they worked on telephony, telephone switches. Right, the computing was in New Jersey. Get a call from a friend at Apple, who, by the way, is still at Apple. He's now a VP there. And he says, hey, what do you know about C++? You folks invented it. Well, that was enough for me to I want to start playing with it. We had this friendly competition in high school, and I wanted to keep going. So I asked around. There's one person in Illinois who's got it on the tape. And it was C-Front 1.0 Release C, which if you haven't heard of it, that's how they first did C++. And for me, it was great because once I saw it, I figured out the object model because you could see the C code it generated. And I also figured out a lot of dark corners of C because it took advantage of those dark corners of C to work. I was very shy back then. I have to drive over to another Bell Labs building, knock on an engineer's door that I'd never met before, to try to get the tape installed. That person was Jim Copleen. He's written, especially early in C++, a lot of very famous books. The Curious Recurring Template Pattern, he helped promote that. And he's great. He's lots of enthusiasm. He was really happy. He's like, yeah, let's do it. So I learned a bunch until I had a question he couldn't answer. And this was the question because it made no sense to me. Right? At that time, right, so int starts, the scope starts there, but it lasts past the end curly brace. And I couldn't figure out why. It just made no sense. That shouldn't be valid. Well, that asserts wrong, but it's like that. So who do I ask when my local expert doesn't there? Well, there's a whole computing division, off in New Jersey, Department 1127, pretty famous. I agonized for 2 days over this email. I don't know Bjarne at that point. I've never met him. I don't think I've ever, before the web, right? I haven't seen anything. And again, I'm very shy, right? But yeah, to be fair, I had, when I was at Bell Labs, I would drop my computer science books in company mail. They send them to New Jersey, get them autographed, and send them back. But besides that, like, no actual communication. I got a very nice, detailed response back. I couldn't find it. I looked for it. And the reason he couldn't do it is kind of a common theme for both C and C++, right? Once you have users, backwards compatibility becomes an issue. Well, the committee would actually fix this problem, but. And I finally did meet him on my very last day at Bell Labs. They brought him in to give a talk. And one of the things they did is the 5SS telephone switch, which at that time was probably one of the biggest software projects in the world. It was about 50 million lines of C code. We estimated about 10 million of that was dead, but we didn't have the tools to find it. And just recompiling it, because C didn't have function prototypes at the time, and C++ did, they found 3 bugs. So that was part of the sales pitch for why to go to C++. Now, Bell Labs was also involved with C Standardization. And I got a paper copy of all the drafts from Dave Prouser. I think he was the secretary for the committee at the time. The ... is kind of the part I wasn't as proud of, but since I'm a junior engineer and I have friends around the world or around the country with junior engineers, I take the paper copy I got and go to the AT&T photocopy department, have them copy it and send it off to my friends at different companies, because none of us knew how to order this stuff or how to find it. There wasn't a web to find it on. So, not my piracy is not my proudest moment, but. And I also, I eventually bought that. It's the C standard. I have a paper copy somewhere. And I followed along with standardization, and then I went on Usenet, and man, that Nevin guy, what an ego. It's one of the ones that even else I could find. It's hard finding Usenet stuff. It's still around, but. So I've always been interested in standardization, but at that time, being a junior engineer, not in the computing department, I had no idea how to go about making it happen. Fast forward a bit. So I go off to BoostCon, right? The very first BoostCon. So Marshall Clow, been a good friend of mine for a lot of years, calls me up one day and says, "Hey, Nevin, Boost is putting on a conference." If you don't know, if you do C++, you probably know what Boost is. Right? It's a collection of open source libraries, a lot of which made the C++ 11 what it is. So Marshall gives me a call. Says, we're putting on a conference. You should be there. I go, "You're right. I should be there." And I meet the late Beeman Dawes. And Beeman goes, "Where do you live?" And I tell him where I live. And he goes, "Oh, yeah, you're by that street where Sanders and Saunders switches names." "You live in Virginia. I live in Illinois. How do you know this?" Turns out he did mapping software, and he just loved cool anomalies like that. So we get to talking, and he says, "Hey, there's an upcoming meeting in your area at Fermilab in 3 years." And again, I'd kind of been thinking, I've been running out of places to go to learn C++. It became a passion of mine, but I didn't know where to go. I used to go to the C++ seminar that Scott Myers and Herb and Andre Elandrescu, Steve Dewhurst, and Dan Sachs put on. And I went to BoostCon to learn cutting-edge library techniques. But if you want to know more of the language, where do you go? All that's really left is the committee. Now, I could have said, wait, I have a job. I can just fly somewhere. But I was scared, right? It's intimidating. The people who wrote the language and write the books, they're much smarter about this stuff than I am, right? It took me 3 years to get up the nerve to attend. When it's local, it's just too hard to resist. And I changed jobs, I didn't know I was going to get to go. And you go there and you think you have imposter syndrome, right? Because everyone is so much smarter than you are. And to Beeman's credit, besides doing Boost and getting all those libraries in, he also recruited a lot of people to the committee. He was really good at that. He was extremely beneficial to C++ in so many ways. And then, hey, we got exotic locations on this committee, right? Varna, look at that, right? Seaside resort. Hawaii, Who can resist going to Hawaii? Tokyo. You have to go to Tokyo last year. That was great. Well, or I've been told anyway. Here's our vision of Varna. Here's our vision of Kona. If you notice, those are doors. Those are not windows. There are no windows in this room. 50 feet from the ocean. Tokyo, we had that, and we got an earthquake while we were there, so there was some excitement. It was really weird. Like, during the earthquake, do we care about our safety? No. We care about taking a screenshot of our phones showing, hey, there's an earthquake, because just how we are. So back to Fermilab, right? I didn't speak during the actual meeting part at all. Like, I knew Matt Ostern for other reasons, through other friends, through his physics. Like, he went to UC Berkeley, and my best friend from high school was a really good friend of his. So I knew Matt from that. And like, Bjarne was there. Like, Herb, I think, was sick, so like he came in like over a loudspeaker. You know, it's long before Zoom and stuff. You know, the voice of God was Herb. So, and nobody told me I could vote in straw polls. Like, just no one said those kind of things. And there really were only three. I mean, we were pretty small. I think we were 50 people. Only three groups, right? Core, library, and then concurrency, which eventually became SG1, study group 1. And part of like a Fermilab, right, the big fight that's going on is how we're trying to finalize how copy and moves constructors, assignment operators, destructors, how do they work with no except? What should they do? What should the defaulting rules be? And we were debating new operations, and someone, you know, who should know better, right, a very smart person, suggests we do bitwise operators. And again, I can't figure out why. Turns out, this is a strategic thing. If you push for something so bad, you might get what you want. Of course, it's a risky strategy. It could backfire, right? So if you're doing bitwise for defaulted move operations, that's not going to, unless your types are trivially copyable, right? That's just going to be incorrect. So you never want that. But you would take almost anything else besides that, and that was what this person was trying to accomplish. Right? It's not just technical on the committee, it's people management. It's selling what you want and understanding how people are going to react. So at this meeting, right, I just started a new job. I just started DRW, a trading company. I'm not used to, like, you know, financial things being approved like that. So I go back and, you know, me and Rob Douglas and I, we both went to the first meeting. We go back, can we join? They asked how much. I think it's like 2,000 US around that at that time. They said, yep, no problem. Next meeting's in Madrid. And again, I started there, right? So I'm looking through the travel policy, and it's like, business class, okay. That's a pretty pricey ticket. I'm not used to it. It's like, I mean, I'm willing to fly coach. And so I go to my manager and I said, hey, you know, I want to go to the next meeting in Madrid, and we're signing off on C++11. Right, again, I'm trying to, I want to be there. And it's not even to go to Madrid, but, and again, his line was this, right? We are cutting back international travel, but you should be there. Right? That was the entirety of that conversation. And in some ways, personally, I was scared. I didn't really do international travel as a kid. I went overseas once when I was 12. And going to a country where I don't speak the language was scary. But I thought also it was important that, you know, work on C++. Now I know I love travel, but I didn't know at the time. And what I learned from Fermilab is that everyone on the committee wants to make C++ a better language, even if no two of us can agree on what that means. And people will press each other's buttons and do it because they think they're right. They will do whatever it takes to get their view. I mean, I kind of wish big governments worked this way, but because at least, you know, the motives really are pure. Like, what would you get out of sabotaging C++? I don't even know how you would do that. Like, and you got to put up with a lot, you know, from both the outside world and in the committee. These things are stressful. But you do learn sometimes you have to be strategic in your thinking. Right? You have to decide, are you trying to convince everybody that you are correct? or are you trying to get your feature in? Those are not the same thing. So Madrid, all the committee pictures start looking alike, but these are the real ones. There's a big topic for narrow and wide contracts and no except. So I'm concentrating on library stuff, and we don't know which library functions to mark no except, and we're coming down to the deadline. Do we mark everything that says throw nothing no except or not? And we're just kind of doing it haphazardly. So there's a paper that Alistair Meredith and John Lakos came out with, with wide contracts and narrow contracts. And a wide contract is roughly a function that has no precondition. Narrow contract is everything else. And you can't just throw through a no except, because no except was initially proposed by Dave Abrams from Boost and other things as just a marker in its undefined behavior to throw through it. And the committee, for safety reasons, decided, long before I got there, that they wanted semantics, so it's required to terminate. So because of this, if you have a test framework, you can't actually throw through a no except clause because, it has semantics. It will terminate your program. So John and Alistair did not want you to be able to throw through a no except clause. I mean, very reasonable, right? So John Lakos goes around to each person, because again, we're a small enough committee, you can do that, and tries to convince each of us individually, like paper, right? No library destructor should throw, right? The library function has a wide contract that cannot throw, mark it no except. Okay, for conditional no except, the only things that matter are swap and move, only mark those, the others don't bother, and the C compatibility functions. So I was convinced. He had convinced me at that point. And then comes the plenary session where we debate this. It's very heated, because right? This matters, right? This is affecting millions of developers. And during this debate, it occurs to me that if you violate a library precondition, right, you're in undefined behavior land, right? That's what the standard says. It's weird because other libraries don't quite have that, but the standard library has this magic. And if you're in undefined behavior, it means the standard no longer applies. And of course, then you can throw it through a no except function because there's nothing telling you can't. No one's saying that, though. So I have to raise my hand. This is the first time I spoke up at the standards meeting in a heated plenary debate. Oh, that was hard. I make my point. Person behind me goes, no except trumps undefined behavior. I slither back down. I believe I was right, still, in the theoretical world of the standard, right? The practical world, yes, you can't throw through a no except clause because compilers don't work. They're not going to do a special, I'm hitting undefined behavior, you can do what you want. And 14 years later, contracts with a capital C is making this better. It's carving out what this means, basically, to have a preconditioned violation. You have some wiggle room into what you can do before you hit undefined behavior. It's still a bug, right? You've detected a bug. So you may not think it's sound, but this past week, we just voted contracts into C++ 26. So this feature's going there. So, and there were a few libraries I couldn't find it. Harvard had something he didn't like. But we managed to get a fragile consensus on Thursday. So Herb takes the poll. I don't remember the words because it was kind of like we realized afterwards he just polled that this is C++ 11, right? We just didn't realize it at the moment he was saying the words. We were happy. Except there was one guy from France who wanted to keep working the next day. Like, one day off in 13 years, I think we earned it. So while I'm in Madrid, I overhear John Lakos offer to help sponsor the upcoming Kona meeting. And remember, DRW had never told me no to anything I've asked for. So I said, hey, can we sponsor a meeting? And the C meeting too, like, why not? That went to the partners. That took a week and a half. It's the only answer at that company that ever took, like, more than a day. But they said yes, so we sponsored the Chicago meeting. At the time, it was the most expensive hotel, and we hit a record. We had 103 attendees. Just to give you a perspective, at Hagenberg just now, we had 201 attendees. Actually, someone's double counted. So it's 200 attendees, 128 of which were in person. So we're growing. We're not quite at our pre-pandemic levels, which would be Prague was our record, but we're getting there. People care about this stuff. So the lesson I learned from this, like, if you think you're right, you have to make your point, because if it's not you, no one's going to say it. And it matters, right? You're affecting the lives of, we get self-deprecating and we have fun, but like, you are affecting the lives of millions of developers. I mean, this stuff matters. Kona, right? Again, no windows. I mean, you do get outside for breaks. It's not like, it is a nice place. So Evolution opens back up. It's the first time I've been involved with Evolution. And there's weird things that happen in it. Like some folks thought Range-Based 4 was just totally broken. Like, again, people you are really smart, why don't they know this? Because they were using the Microsoft compiler, which didn't do argument-dependent lookup. They just didn't know because their compiler, right, anything they tried didn't work. And among other debates we had there, I think we did separators too, we started that, but how often should we ship a standard? Right? The first standard's in 98. 5 years later, it's basically the bug fixed. So really, it's between 98 and 11, right? 13 years. Nobody wants to wait 13 years. So we have a huge debate, and we agree, 6 years sounds like a good pace. Now, I'm in Hawaii. I had to stay over in Hawaii to meet the C committee. I was willing to make that sacrifice. But as you can see, they're a lot smaller than the C++ committee. And C++ has more of a sense of urgency than the C committee does. One thing, if I can remember what it was, I think wobbly values, like what do you do if you have an uninitialized char, or char, and you want to memcopy it? Does it keep the same value? And C++, at the whatever meeting, figured it all out, and Chicago was Chicago. And then the C committee had it all in their head and figured it all out and say, we'll do it next meeting. It's like, you got it all in your head. You figured it out. Just commit. Like, there's plenty of ways, if you don't like that decision, to change it later. So yeah, C++ just has more of a sense of urgency. We have to make things better for developers. But yeah, I did learn these are very smart people, but they have gaps in their knowledge, and you have to teach them that. I mean, I've had gaps in my knowledge. I'm not I didn't, for instance, before I got working at Argonne, I didn't know why trivially copyable mattered. People would suggest it for things, and I'd say, well, sure, why would I say no? But not very enthusiastic. It turns out it's really the only way to transfer things between a CPU and a GPU is to memcopy them. So it really matters, the things that are memcopyable. And so I've learned that, and I have to teach that to other committee members, why this is important. Because then they will support you when you need to vote for those kinds of things. So I'm not going to go through every committee meeting. Here's what I did. That seems like it would be a lot. But I'm going to talk about some of the major battles that I had to fight. So way back in 2011, right, there was a signed int, SIGNED, INT, versus INT bit fields. I'm not a core expert in the language. I am not a type theorist. However, this just felt wrong. So if you declared a bit field using the keyword INT, right, the signedness was implementation defined. If you spelled it SIGNED space INT, then the bit field was signed and did sign math. I have no idea what happens when you spell it decal type of 0. Right? 'Cause that's another way to spell int. Now, to me, in my brain, if they're exactly the same type, right? They're aliases for the same type. They have to behave identically, or they're not the same type. That seems to be what types are, right? Heated debate, well over 100 email messages. It started winding down, and head of core asked, okay, so we all kind of agree that this isn't great, but signed in versus in, they're going to be different. And I go I still don't agree. You can do what you want. I don't normally sit in core, but no. And because I was so persistent, core came around. The reason this was a hard question is that the headers for some microsystems were dependent on this feature. And I think theirs were unsigned, their behavior was. So that's why this is hard, because we actually not only care about what's in the standard, we care about the real world. Another example of that is ABI, right? We do not mention the word ABI anywhere in our standard at all. And yet, we know we can't easily break ABI because that will break real customers, real people. So we have a lot of debates whenever something is going to break ABI compatibility. And there's things that are not obvious. Alistair Meredith had a proposal to not use standard less for comparisons for sets and maps, but use something that forwarded to standard less. The reason is you're only supposed to specialize standard less to do the same thing that operator less than does. And people specialize it. They put an ordering on things like complex, which doesn't have a real ordering. Got all the way through plenary, right? Didn't make it into the standard, because it turns out that's an ABI break, because if you pass that map as a function, the mangling is different. We had to pull it. I mean, it's in some ways it's frustrating, but it's the right thing to do. The big battle, the biggest battle I think I actually had on this committee was optional. It was first proposed in Portland, 2012. And the proposers, they had a really good proposal. They had thought about every line in optional. And one person wasn't sure about optional T-ref semantics, and the paper author said, okay, fine, we'll pull it now. We can always add it back later. So to get to Bristol, and we want to get this in to 14, right? We have a huge, every single time optional came up, people relitigated decisions they didn't like the outcome to. But of course, there's no new information, right? I mean, quite literally, morning, have a break, second session, they relitigate what we just litigated in the morning. There's no information other than you may have had some coffee. Same answer, so you get the same result. So we had an evening session. This was painful. Right? It was basically 7:30 p.m. until we were done. We went past 1 a.m. It wasn't the only thing on the plate either. It was something else we'd do right after that. And we decided everything except relation operators. We just couldn't come to agreement on that. So we kept them in. And we got it added to C++ 14. We voted, the paper got moved, it got put in C++ 14. Just because in the working draft doesn't mean you're going to ship it. Right? In Chicago, it got removed for the same relation operators, and we created the Library Fundamentals TS, Technical Specification. So this is where we put things, or at least did put things, that may not have had enough bake time. Unfortunately, what really is we kind of put things off to die there, or purgatory, really. Well, eventually, for optional, we added it back in C++ 17, along with variant and any, kind of all the sum type kind of things. And optional TREF we were working on in Hagenberg, it's very likely it's going to make it into 26. No, really. There were many false starts, but this one has pretty broad consensus. We just have a few details we're still working out. So why don't TSs work? Well, we get implementation experience out of it, but that's not the important thing. right? We want users to, and users don't use these things. Right? Because if you have a production code base, are you going to risk your production code base on something that's likely to be a dead end? Of course not. And even for libraries, which is the easiest thing in the world, right? Because you can copy the library and maintain it yourself. People don't do this. For myself, like I would use Boost instead of using stuff in the TS, with the sole exception of optional because it was so different than Boost optional. And for like the language ones, like nothing ever. And it's frustrating. And so we've kind of come up with more rules, but you need some concrete questions that you want answered. But there's no time limit, right? You can keep those things, just refresh the document saying, I want to keep doing it. But there's nothing to make it converge. I mean, so we have a library's fundamentals. We have stuff over 10 years old in it now. Is it ever going to be in the standard? Maybe a piece or two, but most of it is so out of date. And plus, the wording's not good, right? Because it was a TS. We go, oh, it's just a TS. We can just put it in here. We'll fix the wording later. And of course, then we want to pull stuff in, like optional. Oh, it was in a TS. The wording must be good. Let's just take it. It just doesn't work. So ISO doesn't like them either. So they have a new thing called white papers. Basically, less process overhead. We just have to publish it. We have to go through their whole editing process, which is, it's the reason it takes us standards more than a year to get out to actually ship. We give them, here's the standard in February, and then a year and a half later, you go, yeah, here's C++ 24. And then Herb Sutter goes, no, 23. It's not our fault you took this long. So there are two white papers. One that got approved in Hagenberg. Transactional memory used to be a TS. And profiles, which is hitting memory safety. Transactional memory, I don't know it's going to go anywhere. It hasn't gone anywhere in the years they've been working on it. I think that, and I don't like TSs, right? You just heard me say that, but I think white paper is the right thing for profiles. It doesn't tie us to C++ 26 schedule. And the airplane view, the 35,000-foot view that Bjarne and Herb and a few others have, is great, right? If you're in an airplane, right, the Earth looks cool, right? There's green patches, and they're all squared off. It's just very pretty. Down in the trenches, we don't know all the details because this is still being invented. It's important to react to both the U.S. government and the EU. Right? Memory safety is a really important, critical thing. And I think this is the best, and the committee agrees with me that this is the best vehicle for moving it forward right now. So I'm kind of burned out after the whole optional thing. Variant comes along. My friend Axel in Urbana. Maybe I was going to call it Urbana. I went to school there. I should know the name. And he wants to target the library fundamentals. And I knew a lot of the issues because when I was at DRW, we came up with our own version of variant because we didn't like the boost variant. And so after I give him a bunch of the issues and what he has to address, he goes, hey, Nevin, you want to help? And asked me to be a co-author. And it's if I'm a co-author, I can't walk out of the room when it's being discussed and I don't like the way it's going. I was too burned out from optional, and so I saw the same kind of battle. But I was willing to work behind the scenes. Anything Axel wanted, I did. It wasn't the work I was afraid of. I just wanted to, if I didn't like how it was going, I need to be able to leave, and I can't leave my own proposal. That's just, you can, but you just shouldn't. So a lot of my job on that proposal was to keep the committee focused on this major open question. You have a variant, has an object of type A in it. You want to change it to an object of type B, and constructing that B throws. What is the state of the variant? We had 200 emails. We had people telling us not enough people were looking at it. Lots of things. Got to the bigger committee, had another 200 emails. But again, there really was no new information. Lots of really, I have a whole talk on this, whole weird ideas, it just terminates, who knows, right? And even the head of one of the national bodies said, don't even think about putting this into a standard before putting it into TS. And we eventually voted to put it in 17. And I want to give a shout out to David Sankel because, he made an impassioned plea that putting optional in the TS didn't do anything, so we shouldn't do that for variant. And because of that plea, and a few other people, we got that any optional and variant in the same release, and they really do belong together. So I want to give a special shout out to Axel. So we're having dinner in Rapperswil at the castle. It was fun. And we're sitting next to someone, and that person goes, well, I want to make this change to variant. And I don't even remember what the change was or who it was. So Axel goes, you should write a paper. The person goes, oh, you support this? No, I hate it. But the committee should debate it. And for me, that's how the committee should work, and that's how I try to work. If you have an idea, write a paper, bring it in front of the committee, and get all the stakeholders, those even against you, in the room at the same time. Don't try, people try tricks, they'll schedule things when they know someone else is busy. They almost never work, because by plenary, they'll have made their point. This happened a lot with digit separators. People tried to schedule things when Doug Reger, who was representing Apple in Objective-C++, couldn't be in the room. Things would pass, get to plenary, things would fail. And that's not a good strategy. And it's hard, right? You don't want to be it's hard to bring people in who are against your proposal. But if you want your proposal through, they have to be heard. And their points have to be debated. So Axel's one of the people who shaped how I view and do committee work. Then comes string view. It started out as string ref. Proposed by Jeffrey Askin at Google. It's really cool. I looked at it when it initially came out. It's I wish I'd invented this. It's so simple. It solves a lot of the problems. It's a non-owning, it's a reference, right? It's non-owning. Because before this, we put everything inside standard string, even though we didn't need to. And that allocates, right? So it's not great. So we have a debate in LEWG. Google wants this to be valid in an empty string view. I've done database stuff. There's a difference between empty and non-existent. And this means non-existent. If you want an empty range, make it a range, add 0. Or comma 0. Well, I lost that debate. Break time comes. I'm kind of murmuring, I'm venting to other people on the committee. And they're going, no, wait a minute, Nevin. I think you're right. Enough people do this, and they go to the chairs and say, we need to have a bigger session because there are more concerns than just LEWG about this. So we're going to meet in Rapperswil. Let's debate this. By the way, that meeting, I presented 3 major things, and I wrote no papers. I had minions. I didn't know that I had. Because it turned out there were a lot of people on my side for things. So one of them I'll get to a little bit later is renaming make unique default init. I wrote the title in my page, and someone on the mailing list said, hey, I just wrote this paper. And I go, are you going to be in Rapperswil? He goes, no. But I go, I'll present it for you. That's fine. We'll get to that. So there's what was nicknamed the Thunderdome section, me versus Google, right? Now, my friend, York Brown, I've been friends for many years. I see online, on Facebook, he goes, my flight was late. I got to Paris. I'm driving to Switzerland. That's the last I've heard of him. And he'd had issues driving in the U.S. There were a number of states that wouldn't let him drive anymore. So he'd had issues. I don't see him at the Monday morning plenary, and he knows 2 people. He knows me and Marshall Clough very well. He finds Marshall. He asks Marshall, where's Nevin? And Marshall goes, in the Thunderdome, not explaining what that is. The whole reason Google sent York to that meeting was to debate me. So Titus had to, I had to go against Titus instead, because we didn't know no one knew where York was, right? I didn't even know he was at the meeting. I felt so bad. Like, he goes all the way to Switzerland from California and then doesn't get to debate me. And the committee is convinced by my arguments. Now, there were some weak arguments made in my favor, and I don't like that. Like, someone said, this requires a null pointer check. And we can't afford that. It's too expensive. And it's like, do you know how much or how little a null pointer check costs? And do you know how often that gets optimized away because this is all inline? Like, that to me is a very weak argument. I don't like weak arguments. I go like, that reason is not part of my position. Like, if I can't make strong arguments, then I'm more likely to be wrong. And to me, it's important to make strong arguments. It's not important for me to be right. It's important for me to be heard and for the committee to make the right decision, even if it's not the one I agree with. Oh, but span was another one of the papers. Again, I didn't write anything. So span was the thing I took my eye off the ball. Microsoft had proposed array view, which mostly became empty span and empty span. And it was so complicated, I go like, and before I'm an HPC, so I don't need it. It's like, well, mere mortals can't understand this. Oh, well, they can do what they want. I'm not going to pay attention anymore. And in plenary vote, my friend Rob Douglas, who's between jobs, so we don't know if he can vote or not. Not just me. Hey, Nevin, you need to protest. You need to object to this in plenary. I go, why? He goes, because the size type is signed. Oh. We asked Herb if Rob can object. He goes, it's just better if you do it, Nevin. The stress. So I object, and it turns out, so Jeffrey Askin, who was chair of LEWG, said we had debated it. We go through the minutes. It turns out we never did debate it. We just forgot. So on the other side of this is Bjarne and Herb. So what the basic argument is for this is unsigned types wrap. So they're harder to optimize and they're harder to find bugs because 99%, some large percent of the time, wrapping behavior is a bug. And you can't, if you have a sanitizer that's no false positives, you can't detect that bug. So they want, and then things that are signed can optimize better because they can't wrap legally. So that's what this debate's about. And for me, well, since size type throughout the standard is unsigned, there's a lot of friction if you want to make this signed, right? You have to cast all over the place, and people get casting wrong, right? Casting is a many-to-one operation. It tends to be buggy. Like, you cast signed to unsigned or unsigned to signed, and if you get it wrong, subtle bugs sneak in. And I figured out examples with subtle bugs, with like F-read and stuff. So I have to go against Bjarne and Herb. I mean, this is terrible. You guys are easy. Like, that was terrifying. That scared me. Like, and then I ended up doing it at 2 different meetings because, again, I didn't write the paper. My name's on it. I didn't write the paper, so I didn't realize it had wording. So people like to relitigate when they don't get their way. So, and when it's Bjarne and Herb, they get to relitigate when they don't like their way. But yeah, I mean, Bjarne is still mad at me to this day. He's happy with MD-span because we found a way to sneak in, into extents. We actually sneak in the types. You can actually make it signed if you want. But so he's much happier there. However, as part of this, like, I hadn't realized it was still spelled index type, not size type. And we're at the last meeting, right? So I write an MB national body comment to address this, right? Either we rename it to size type or we put both in. Those were like the only two options I could think of, right? Sails through, just rename it. Get to plenary. Guess whose paper was objected to first at plenary? I had such an honor, right? And I couldn't figure out, like, I'm debating someone over email on something else, right? And like, I look up, like, that's my paper. And like, I was not the rep from Argonne, and at the time, only U.S. companies got 1 vote each. So I told, like, hell, you need to vote yes for this. And when things calmed down, like, I waited for, like a week. I asked, why did you object, right? And the reason, and this was a national body that objected. And the reason they objected is they didn't want SPAN to have an unsigned size type. So they were objecting to everything. And the rest of the committee kind of like said, no, that's not the way to do it. Like, this was decided. I mean, this was the right fix. Because I didn't know if there was some reason it shouldn't be, right? So yeah, I have the distinction of the first objection in Prague. Now, something that worked well was in-place vector. I know Gonzalo, there you are. Right? So the way I got involved with this is way back when I proposed a way to put unmovable types into vector. You need to be able to do a reserve when it's empty, and you need a try pushback kind of call so that it doesn't do allocations. I brought it to LEWG. They said, nope, you're not getting that. So then I go, hey, what about small vector? A vector with embedded space and an allocator. You're like, yeah, you can do that. And I asked at the same time, what about static vector? Yeah, we're not enthused by that, but we're not saying no. We're just not saying yes. So, oh wait, sorry, Matt Gobble, wrong picture. I've known Matt for years. I always try to work in a Matt joke somewhere. So Matt and I spent 2 days trying to think of what's the worst possible name we can come up with for small vector so that we get small vector. He comes up with clump. And I did get small vector, right? Clump is like the worst possible name. Again, it's a strategy, right? It could backfire. We could have been. Unfortunately, I haven't gotten back to work on this. Or fortunately for in-place vector, one of the two. Part of this was they wanted a base class. LEWG wanted a base class that type erased out the size of the embedded space. Someone else volunteered to do that. They never actually did it. And I changed jobs 3 times since then. So Gonzalo was proposing at the time static vector. And I keep getting like questions about it. And then he's very smart. He asked me to be a co-author. Oh, David Sengel and Teamer. In this way, like, I'm not going to be, I mean, if I'm on paper, right, I'm going to be supporting it. I'm not going to try to, like, at all, like. But I had some issues, and, we didn't agree on everything. And again, David Sengel, to his credit, right, got us together. And again, we're working, across countries, but got us together, and we worked out our differences. Like, he wanted unchecked pushback. I didn't care about that. I wanted the type that gets thrown if you run out of space to be derived from bad alloc. He didn't like it. That's fine. We ironed out our differences, and we decided the things we can't agree on, we'll let LEWG decide, and we'll live with that decision. We're not going to push back anymore. And to their credit, to David and Gonzalo, right, this is how the process should work. Right? If we can't come to consensus, you should, unless there's new information, believe the committee when it comes up with a decision. So Varna comes along, and Monday morning, like, well, the wording's not quite there. We're not going to be able to push it forward at this meeting. By Wednesday, we had Daniel Krugler. I convinced him to spend his lunch, and he helped us get wording done. The last session on Friday, we got it approved by LEWG. So if you wonder why it's important to be at these meetings, it's because it can happen that quickly. Was it this year? Maybe last year we had a telecon. Some people didn't like some of the decisions that were made. They tried to relitigate. And David Sengel and I pushed back very hard against relitigation. We said, here's each of our positions. And I think you were there too, Gonzalo. But we would rather not relitigate this at all. We agree with, LEWG has decided. Other folks wanted to add allocator template parameter. That got litigated in Tokyo. They didn't get enough support. And for other reasons, we couldn't move it into CL 26 in Tokyo. So they tried to relitigate it again last week. Thursday, as a matter of fact. Again, I pointed out, there is no new information. And so 15 minutes later, we decided not to relitigate it. And just to point out, I'm still friends with the person on the other side of this. These are technical discussions. And the one thing about the name, I have this running joke. LEWG will never pick a shorter name when a longer one will do. I think there's one thing they've changed in the last 6 years where they shortened the name. Almost everything else has been growing. Drives me crazy. So my first proposal had this cool title, Respect Vector Reserve Request Relative to Reallocation. People don't like fun titles, but the reason I do it is so I can Google it years later and still find it. So I was working in embedded, or I had worked on slot machines for a lot of years, and I wanted to make vector reserve the exact number of elements because all the implementations were doing that anyway. And for embedded, it matters. You don't want to overcommit. And all the way to plenary in Finland, again, it's before Zoom, so I was listening in to the plenary session because I wasn't there. One person said his vector didn't work that way. He had since corrected that. One wanted to do overcommitting in memory, but would do it with a different interface. And a third one wanted to do it with reserve. That proposal has yet to materialize. Yes?
What's the difference between just reserve?
The one inside vector, how much space, how many elements it reserves space for. Right, vector is a class, right? It's got a reserve call. It says, I want to make sure there's space for at least this number of elements.
And the other one just stored reserve.
These are all reserve. It's all vector reserve. I think I may have done string too, but string's less critical. Yes?
Is that like a static function or like the dot reserve?
No, dot reserve. This is the one, this is the one inside vector. I just wanted to do what everything, it made sense to me, right? So that get all the way to plenary and rejected in plenary. And I pushed for the vote, like I didn't want to wait. Like, what's the point? But so because of that, the committee added a new policy. If you look in standing document 4, we have a thing called delay versus burden in the hand. We no longer wait on yet to exist proposals because they may never exist. We don't stop our work unless there's an actual proposal. We could delay for a meeting, but that's about it. And I think that's good. My first successful proposal was adding no except in, well, one spot. Anyone know why I couldn't do that one? Allocators. PMR allocators. Well, it turns out we don't know how to put those in standard function anyway. But assuming that happens someday, so yeah, I basically threw out some words and added a no except. That was my first successful proposal on this committee. It's a lot of work. My first successful language proposal was making operator square bracket static. So what happened was a static operator, function call operator, got through the committee, and a variadic square bracket operator got through the committee. And each of those papers says, well, if the other one goes through, we should have a static variadic operator square bracket. But no one had proposed it. Now, you're not supposed to get language features during an NB comment, national body comment. So I wasn't going, and I had no pressing need for this. This was like I think it was 23. It all blurs. So, again, I'm friends with committee members, right? They come to town, so Michael Wong and I were somewhere, and I'm griping about this, like, hey, I'm going to do this, but it's a language. It's technically a new language feature. And he goes, no, you should do this. I'll write the Canadian national body comment. Okay, it's a start. Gasper comes visiting Chicago. We have dinner. Same thing happened. Again, I'm not trying to lobby him. We're just talking about C++ stuff. And he goes, no, I'll write a national body comment too. And it's like, okay, 3 countries, I'll go for it. And it got in. It was basically viewed as a bug fix, so that's why it got in. And then I had to go to core. So the first time I've actually been in core for my wording, I brought them chocolate. It can't hurt, right? And I think I had to change the wording because the standard had changed, from the one I had referenced to the next release. Not success. I mean, I've had my share of failures. One was we were in a library working group only meeting. I hate scribing. Absolutely hate scribing. So Marshall Cloud's running the meeting, and he goes, okay, we need a paper written from LWG to LWG, taking all the old constructors that have multiple parameters, right? If they have one parameter, they should be implicit, and or explicit, and if they have multiple ones, implicit. I wrote that paper instead. It's like I fixed 79 constructors or something. I have a T-shirt made, like marketing. LEWG said, no, we don't want this principle. We never really voted on, do we want just these changed? Someone's pushing for it now as a principle. Zach Lane is. I hope he's successful. I certainly support him. Another thing is I want contiguous containers to have that data. It turns out that's not a requirement. And for some of the stuff we're doing like MD array, this will be useful. And the committee comes back and says, hey, you should do concepts for containers. Oh, no. Concepts, unfortunately, usually are over-constraining. And went back and I said, no, let's not do that. Another thing, you got it from that Rappersville meeting. So I didn't write the paper, but I proposed make unique default init, right? So it's make unique where the space is not zero initialized for performance. And this is right after I argued my first time arguing span size type. So I'm exhausted. Titus goes up to me and says, you have another paper, Nevin. It's like, well, I wrote no paper, so what are you talking about? And he goes, oh, yeah, this one's like, okay, I can do this one in my sleep. And I went around, I would ask people, like, you know, they go, oh, I don't like the names. Like, do you like the functionality? Oh, yeah, I want that. Okay, you can debate the functionality some other time. And I kept doing whack-a-mole like that. But again, we forgot to actually debate the name. My goal was to not be in the room when they debated the name. So it comes up, and Nico is like hates this name, Nico Cities. And we finally come up with a good name, like make unique for overwrite, saying its purpose. Unfortunately, LEWG didn't use that as precedent for the future, because we have since then we have move only function, which contains things that are not movable, because the wrapper is move only, so it's not its purpose. I've had success though. I mean, big things like I've been involved. I'm not the only author. Size and place vectors, MD span, linear algebra. That's two big things. Making span and string view trivially copyable. It's because if you don't say those words, they may not stay that way because core definitions change and context expert changes and very subtle things. I helped stop any more future library fundamentals TSs. Like they wanted to approve the version 3, and I said, no, because I want to stop this. They go, well, that's editorial. It's like, they're just going to apply the same reasoning for number 4, so they changed the words enough. And then something early on, I was refining contiguous iterators to get the pointers out. And that got dropped for a while, and then Casey Carter picked it up, and I think it's in now. So chairing. So we're in Prague, right? We're going to vote like C++ 20 in. Most people have not seen that picture. Turns out someone did like a quick view picture on an iPhone. So there I am in the top hat. So immediately after that meeting, right, I talked to my boss Hal. He says, "Yeah, you should do this." And so I accept the vice chair, co-chair position. How much work is it? You do a little prep work beforehand. You meet for a day or two. You do a little work afterwards. How much work could it be? Yeah, COVID hit like right after. I mean, no one knew. We knew it was coming, but no one knew what that was meant. It became a lot of work. That's how we all became Library Evolution co-chairs, because we had to move to doing things virtually, and we couldn't burn out people trying to host telecom every week or two, because it turns out it is a lot of work. So we came up, Billy and I, we have a philosophy for Loogie. Loogie started in San Diego in 2018. And what we see as chairs is that our job is to get a paper in the best shape for the bigger group to see. Even if we disagree with the proposal, it's not really our technical opinion. And we got to make sure, not that they do things the way I say they should do things, but all the technical points should be covered in the paper. Right? And we're not a stage, right? This was a fear when Loogie got formed, that we just be a stalling tactic. And we don't want to be a stalling tactic. If a paper's ready, we ship it on. And also, as a chair, I have to predict the time of the participants. If I'm wasting their time, they're not going to come. And to do this, like for IntelliCons, we only review one paper per telecon. Like, I make fun of Library Evolution because they like have like 3 or 4 papers on their agenda. They get to like 1 or 2, and they run late. We don't do any of that, and on purpose, we're very careful not to do that. And if you're interested, it's a great place to learn how the beginning of the process and to see a paper starting out. So as a chair, things I've learned, right? Never make promises you cannot keep, right? A lot of us chairs are people pleasers, so it's hard not to do this. Especially promises about committee time. I've warned every library evolution chair about this one because it leads to fights. Like, until we had a code of conduct, like these would all be code of conduct violating fights. Because people think they're not being heard. Every chair has forgotten this at some point. It's hard, right? But you do this and like people are really mad. Because they prep for something and they can't present it. You've wasted their time. And it turns out, even the committee, but even more so, like, the job of chairing is about managing people as much as it is about technical excellence. So is like giving proposals, but here, like, this is really your main job. And you don't really realize that until you start chairing. Listen to people. They need to vent, they want to say something. You don't have to talk that much. As long as they're being heard, they're usually, I don't want to say happy, but they're satisfied. Especially when a decision doesn't go their way, right? As long as they're staying within the code of conduct, let them vent, and then help them find ways to move their ideas forward. I mean, we are facilitators. That's our job as chairs. So why do I do this, right? In part, I believe one should give back to all the communities you are a part of, and this is how I give back. I really believe every release we've had of C++, we've had a better language. Even though I know how the sausage is made. Like, it's stressful, there's battles, it's tough. Right? And I highly encourage you to come to meetings. Come to a meeting and see how it's done. Right? You are qualified to do that. I mean, just being in a meetup like puts you in the top 1%. Most people don't even, this is the easiest thing in the world to come to, and most people don't do it. Right? It's because you're interested, you want to learn. And I spend a lot of my time learning there. Right? Try not to be intimidated. I mean, I still get intimidated. Like, this past meeting, I had to go against the chair of EWG on 3 separate sessions. Like, it's hard. And what I found out is, and I couldn't remember any examples, but I've seen many times one remark and the entire room changes its position, including the author. It's like, oh, I didn't think about that. So it's important. Users are underrepresented on these committees because they can't get sponsorship to go, right? They can't get the time or the money to go, even though the meetings are free. So, I do my best to represent users, but more helps. So if you're presenting a proposal, think of it as you're going for your PhD, or here's your dissertation, there's a panel of experts, and they don't care if you graduate. And it's not stressful, really. But remember something, it's your ideas, not you, are being judged. And even so, that's not even true. Like, it's all for the most part, it's trade-offs. And you see the world differently than I do because you've had different experiences. Like, what happens a lot is a company will have a lot of representation, and they'll be accused of trying to stack the votes. Right? I've seen this for Microsoft, for Google, for the national labs, because a bunch of us come from different labs. And if you watch the people in the room, that's just not true. They're voting against each other at times. It's just, for the most part, they work on the same sorts of problems, so they see the same sorts of trade-offs, so they make the same decisions. And that's okay, right? Because that's based on their expertise, not, an imposed position. Because we're all individual experts. In a meeting, people have to listen. They don't have to agree with you, but if they want to push things forward, you get to present. And if you come with a proposal, keep in mind what you're willing to compromise on. It may not be your ideal, but we don't do design by committee, but we do consensus by committee. And you want to get broad appeal. And there's a lot of decisions which, at the end of the day, don't matter that much to you. You know, you go, okay. One common thing I hear from members of the committee are, we should reject more papers. Followed by, not my papers, obviously. But that doesn't scale, right? We know sometimes that's how you can get your employer to send you to a meeting, right? You write a paper. It's how you get involved. We want good papers, really, is the answer. And why does the committee work, right? It works because we each get a little bit of committee time for the large amount of time we give back. So one of my fears, and luckily it was unfounded, was when we went to hybrid meetings, people would only show up online for their paper, right? And that doesn't work because, but it turns out for the most part, they want to be involved with the whole process. They just can't get to the meeting for whatever reason. So it is working. And the thing to remember is what's more valuable than committee time? Like Herb Sutter will tell you, like, we have like $1.5 million worth of committee time every committee meeting or something. Your time is more valuable, and always keep that in mind. And your mental health is more valuable. These things are stressful. If you're not feeling it, walk away for a day or longer. So why do I keep doing it? A friend of mine came up with this phrase. I don't know where he got it. I mean, I'm riding on the coattails of geniuses, right? I learn at every single meeting. Hopefully I'm making a positive difference in your lives. It's kind of a scary thought. But ultimately, the reason I go, I like the people. I mean, we have fun. You know, they're smiling. I mean, we've had heavy debates in these meetings, and they were still smiling. This was Thursday. Okay, that was Thursday. We were under a lot of pressure and stress that Thursday of last week. And yet, we're still happy and smiling. See? Without fear. Or you can even ask me about the shirt. Look at those pictures. This might be Arna's shirt. So, yes.
So, probably, maybe the answer to this question is quite easy, but in C++, a lot of time the decision is make this undefined behavior. Is it just for performance reasons?
No. No. Sometimes it's correctness reasons. So and I'll give you the same example. By the way, good question. And by the way, I could cheat and just say it depends, because that's the answer to almost every question in C++. I mean, what is a this pointer? I bet you can't come up with a 5-word answer that doesn't start out with it depends. Think about lambdas. They changed it. But no, so the reason undefined behavior is sometimes we don't have a good behavior. I'll give this the example of unsigned numbers versus signed numbers, right? Unsigned numbers wrap, with respect to addition and subtraction, but it's almost always a bug, right? It's well-defined behavior, it's reasonable behavior, and yet it leads to buggy code. So we don't know, for a lot of things, what is the right behavior that just doesn't lead to bugs. For a long time, we went on with this, and then it turns out Thomas Cappe came up with erroneous behavior, which we added in C++ 26, which is well-defined behavior that is definitely a bug. So that way it doesn't crash your program, hopefully. It still has well-defined behavior, but you could have a compiler on to say, like, you shouldn't do that. We didn't have a way to say that before. And now we have a way to say that. And that, to me, that's important. Wait, I think the mic's coming.
To hook into that question, I've wondered that for quite a while, wouldn't implementation-defined behavior give you the same power? Or maybe not the same power, but enough power? Well, because it could be implementation-defined behavior for your compiler to always say, no, that's not okay. Or your sanitizer to tell you, no, that's not okay. Doesn't that already give you enough leeway to do that kind of thing?
Good question, and turns out no. Constant language, so I hate separating language and library undefined behavior, but pretend that we're just talking about language undefined behavior. It makes no sense, because if you say undefined and give it a definition, we do that for const expert, right? Undefined behavior at const expert time has to be not compiled. So implementation defined has to still compile. We wouldn't want that, actually, at context per time, because it could tell you there's a bug. And there's lots of pressure to do more defining of undefined behavior. A lot of us push back on that.
Hello? Yeah. So maybe about that pressure, there's kind of a joke that goes about like C++ is what language design looks like when you have regulatory capture by compiler developers. Any thoughts?
We make those same kind of jokes, but it's no, it's again, the committee is a lot of really smart people. We're not always smart as a group, but it's hard, right? You're trying to get consensus on things, and we all have different viewpoints, and it's just hard work, and we're all thinking really, trying to find problems and it's just the process. I don't know if there's a better process, right? To be Arne's credit, he gave it over to standardization. I mean, I don't know if he forced him to or not, like C did, right? So we are, a committee by consensus, right? There's no dictator in charge of us. That has pluses and minuses, right? And one of the minuses is that it's hard to make a consistent language because these people argue, I'm doing this for consistency. And then we go, consistent with what? Because it's contradictory, and you got to pick one. And I think it's just a result of the process. And there are other processes, I just don't know that they're better. They're different, I know they're different. But it's a good question, it's a hard question. Hopefully I didn't really answer it, but I'm trying to do the best I can.
Yeah. Oh. Okay. So in my professional experience, I contributed to some industrial standards, which are in place in this moment in some of our vehicles. And what I learned there, it was that it was always a little bit less about the honest engineering, and you had a lot of politics, because many of the representatives, I was as well a representative, were coming from corporations. To what extent this behavior it is replicated in the C++ committee when an economic actor is fighting to have his own changes pushed in?
No, that's a really good question. For the most part, it doesn't work. It's a lot of really smart people. And we can usually see through that it's some corporation is pushing for its interests, right? They have to gain broad support, like for MDSpan, we got NVIDIA on board and a few national labs on board and Intel on board, right? So we were showing this had broad appeal across multiple companies, right? We weren't just making one company happy. Especially if you're trying to make one company happy at the expense of another, right? That other company will speak up, saying this is not the right way. Right? This doesn't meet our stuff. So, I mean, there is, people play little political games, but for the most part, they just don't work because we see through it. I mean, it's hard to fool a room full of really smart people. I'm not saying it's impossible, but because it probably happened, but, over time, companies, right, have gotten accused of, Microsoft said they didn't change their compiler for a lot of years, and, they were trying to lock people in. But now they really are, trying to make the language better and appeal to everyone. I mean, again, as I said, people are there if they see the same, Bloomberg sees the same kind of problems. They see contracts as a solution. Again, they're not. I mean, it's certainly going to help. It may help them, find bugs, right? They'll help them. That helps them and everyone economically. But their experts really believe this is the right technology, and they've convinced us. I mean, the contracts vote was, I think, 100 in favor, right? So. Out of 200 people, that's, and I forgot, about 120 voters, something like that. I can't remember, 125. People leave before the final plenary. But the dissenting numbers didn't change since evolution looked at it. So they've managed to convince a whole lot of committee people who have no vested interest in this to be successful. So I hope that answers your question. I'm very cognizant of politics, right? But it shouldn't affect our technical decisions. I mean, we can't know for sure, right? Because people can get sent by the company for any reason, but it's really hard to affect the language at such scale with so many people just to make your company richer.
Did you ever observe, as chair of an international meeting, that the more heated the debate gets, the more the non-native speakers of English are at disadvantage?
I mean, there are some people on the committee with thick accents, and we certainly try very hard to understand the points they are making. I mean, I don't know how to solve that problem, like in general. But we know they have thick accents, but we know like they also have incredibly important things to say, and they have swayed their committee in very positive ways with what they say. So if you have a suggestion we can do better with, it's just hard. And you know, to Herb Sutter's credit, like he's been a great convener, and he's very good about making sure things are done fairly. Like even when he was at Microsoft, he's at Citadel now. Even when he was at Microsoft, he was not advocating Microsoft's position. He was advocating the language to be better.
And if you permit a second question.
Sure.
Are you still coding yourself? How are you finding the time for that with all the committee work? But on the other hand, you need it to stay technically updated, right?
It's hard, right? I have to limit the amount of time I spend on committee stuff. And it gets hard when you're a chair, right? And like, again, I'm lucky I work at a place that supports the work. But yeah, I still have to code, and I still want to code, right? Because if I'm not in the trenches writing stuff, I won't have the technical expertise to make these decisions. And I know that. You know, I've got to be trying the stuff out that we've put in the standard or going to put in the standard as best I can. And that's important. And luckily, because I work on COCOS, which is a performance portability layer developed by the national labs, for basically every time there's a new supercomputer, right, the bidding process goes out, and they decide which of the U.S. chip vendors the Department of Energy is going to give money to. And scientists don't want to have to rewrite their code. So they use things like SYCL and OpenMP in the C side and COCOS as a library to insulate them so they don't have to rewrite very much. So I work on that. So I am still in the trenches.
Hi. Do you see any influences from other programming language in the committee? Like people trying to force some features from other programming?
Good question. So we had someone from Rust at our meeting this past week. And while I'm sure some people looked at it with suspicion, I don't. I look at it as an opportunity. Early in my career, long before I had kids, basically, right, I loved programming languages. I would look at different things. Icon was one of my favorite programming languages ever. Functional languages, they give you different ways of looking at problems. And so we had someone from the Rust Foundation, and what he is trying to promote is interoperability between C++ and Rust and other languages. And I think this is a good thing, right? If we can have a good story and a good way to do this, it helps both languages, right? I don't see right, some people see it as a language war. I don't. I see it just an opportunity, right? Ultimately, the language is just a tool, right? So I'm at Argonne and we do science, right? And while I'm passionate about C++, my day job is really to make sure the scientists can do the science without having to, they care about C++. Now, they might care about it, but that's not their primary job. Their primary job is the science. And it's my job to enable what they do. Hopefully I do good at that too. So I hope that answered your question.
Hi. Thank you for your detailed talk. One thing with C++ is, for example, we are talking about C++ 26.
Yes.
I don't know when I'll be using C++ 26. It takes quite a while. But developers like me are doing lots of development work, everyday work with C++. Like you said before, you're implementing from the committee, and then the compilers take a while, and then the actual developers take a while to do it, right? So the things that are formalized for a standard, let's say for C++ 23 is the next thing that we're looking to integrate in our compilers. It takes some time to get the feedback and figure out which one is useful and which one's maybe not so what we thought it might be, right?
We get it wrong sometimes.
Yeah, so my question is how do we increase this feedback mechanism? How, having compilers for longer, or having this period of, let's say, some standards are not formalized officially until like we get enough feedback. Is there any scope for that kind of a mechanism to work there?
So I think I missed this. I think I deleted my slide accidentally. Like when we moved to 3 years was between like Kona and Portland. Like I missed a pre-meeting telecon, and somewhere between those two, we changed to 3 years from 6 years. And we realized like this is for a lot of people, it's a hard pace. And I'll give a real world. When I was at DRW, right? So I'm on the committee, and I come back. It's like let's go to C++11, and we flip the switch. And about 2 weeks later, we have a field issue. We flip the switch back. The field issue is, of course, there's some undefined behavior in our code, and it got exasperated. It wasn't the fault of the compiler. However, we could not flip this try again for over a year. So we know that for some people, the pace is hard. A lot of what's helping is like the base for LLVM is also moving forward every 3 years. And Cocos, we're doing the same thing. Right now, we're on C++17 is our minimum. The next major release, which should be, I think this year sometime, is going to be C++20. I'm trying to push, Intel's pushing back. You guys. I'm trying to push Sickle to C++20 as well. It's just friendly. It's because, no, we realize we want to be able to use these features. We want everybody to be able to use these features. I mean, there's things, we're hopefully making the language better. Like things like CTAD, compile time, argument deduction, so you don't have to put angle brackets, right? For Sickle, that made things immensely easier to program. Like, otherwise, like, you spend a lot of time, in details you don't care about. And I don't know how to get more people to jump on board. I think the shorter cycles have helped because when it's 13 years, flipping that switch is scary, right? When it's every 3 years, as long as you got to figure out a way to pace your organization so it's following at some cadence, right? You don't have to be bleeding edge, but you don't want to stay trailing edge. So if you can figure out a way to make your organization every 3 years move the minimum up, it won't be so painful. Hopefully that answers like the best advice I can give.
Did I understood right when you said that you prefer Boost over standard library?
No. I like Boost. Don't get me wrong. But at the time, this is around when Library Fundamentals version 1 came out.
Okay.
We hadn't a version of it. Library Fundamentals came out. And I preferred using the things in Boost over using the things in that TS that were implemented. Because I knew the things in the TS would, at some point, not be supported. Okay. Right? Like, for instance, one of the things in there was shared pointer with array syntax was in there. I much prefer to use the Boost version over the version in Library Fundamentals because I knew the version in Boost would be supported until this stuff gets put into the standard, and then I can migrate my code over to the stuff in the standard.
I'm asking this because yesterday I bashed some guys because they did not use the standard library versus another implementation, and I said that you should always use standard library. And earlier I was confused.
Yes, if it's in the standard library itself, yes, that's. I mean, for better or worse, that's our C++ package manager. I mean, there's a whole tooling group trying to solve that problem too. Like, and I hope they do. But yeah, it's more for things in TSs because I can't risk it. Otherwise, at some point I'm going to own this code and I would have to maintain it.
All right. Then, Nevin, thank you very much for the talk. This was great.
Thank you for having me. I got to give my one, like, we're run by the Department of Energy. I'm supposed to put that up all the time. Okay. Thank you very much. This was fun.
Then one more thanks to our hosts. This was amazing. Thank you very much, RNS. And last but not least, thank you for being here tonight. So have a good trip home. Officially, we are supposed to leave now. Actually, minus 1 minute. So indeed, it would be great if you could now slowly pack up, grab your stuff, and then perhaps at 10, they can actually close the doors.
Up. Yeah, thank you very much also from my side. Maybe just one little note. When my colleagues are getting you outside to the exit, please give them your badges, because we need them back. Thank you very much for being here.